Here is a lecture about the reading classroom. We're looking here at some elements that increase the classroom environment's potential for supporting kids, both with reading difficulties and for students who are travelling along at a good pace. Here are the elements that we'll talk about in this lecture. The first one is prevention versus correction. Now, of course, the best prevention in the case of a primary classroom is going to be a high quality literacy program. If you can develop and support students in an effective way right from the beginning of their learning, then you're going to have a less chance of students having difficulties. We know that the teacher has been found to be an incredibly important element to the success of students. In fact, the instruction, the quality of instruction, is thought to be one of the most important factors in whether students are able to read properly or correctly. It also safeguards self-esteem for students. That if they feel success early on, they're going to have an increased level of self-esteem and feel quite comfortable and happy to be readers themselves. Now, in terms of what is a high-quality literacy program, you've touched on those elements in all your other English units. So I'm not going to go into it here, but we find that our best guide to this is the materials that are given to us from the curriculum departments. And you'll also find that each school will have their own specifically developed program based on those elements. You can also find a little bit of information about that in Conza and Westwood when they talk about how literacy classrooms need to have a balanced approach. We'll go into that a little bit in a few slides. The importance of success, this is where we consider the Matthew effect and how with success there is increased effort and more success, but also the opposite. So in our classrooms we want students to feel success, not success that's not earned, but that is carefully structured to allow students to go through a scaffolded stage of learning where with increased difficulty they're able to find success. What you're going to find is that a lot of these points are very interconnected. So here we're talking about the Matthew effect, but also the importance of scaffolding, which is another one of the elements. Knowing the students is something that you absolutely have to do in order to build on the known. So again, here's a link to scaffolding. If you begin with what is known, you are activating background knowledge, you are allowing the student to add to their schema, and you've got increased chance of learning happening. This is why diagnostic testing is really important, or pre-testing, before you teach a new concept. Find out what your students know, where they're beginning, so that you can build on that. And if we think back to the last slide, we're again allowing success to happen if we increase the level of difficulty incrementally as we go along. Continuous assessment and monitoring of progress is another element that needs to be considered. You've been able to develop a bank of assessment tools in your tutorials, so hopefully they are going to be a good starting point for you. We also need to consider the importance of assessment for learning, and that we stop and allow students to become a part of the assessment process, that we clearly indicate to them what the learning intentions are, that we indicate to them what the assessment expectations are, that we allow them to self-assess along the way, that we ask questions that are going to stimulate their thinking and learning, and we provide lots and lots of feedback so that they can feel a part of that process even more. Direct and systematic instruction has always been an important element, and it's taken on more importance in some times over the years, but for now we know that we need a balanced approach. Yes, we need experiences with literature, we need a classroom filled with books and literacy opportunities, but there also needs to be instruction in foundation skills, instruction in key strategies that students need, and it needs to be systematic. It needs to be documented what is first, what is second, what is third, and it needs to be done in a way that the students are left in no doubt that this is explicitly what you want them to learn. Of course, our curriculum is generally very clear in telling us what is needed to be learned. Thinking about what you bring into the classroom is important too. And here, again, the tutorials have been giving you some ideas about some instructional material that you might want to use. We have to think about what's quality and not just what might be thought to be popular or look good. You have to consider what is its purpose and is it going to fulfill that purpose well. We also need to remember that if we're reading with students in the guided reading or in an instructional manner, we have to have text at their instructional level. You don't want to have a text that's too easy, which will mean that they won't be prompted to use strategies, and you don't want a text that's at frustration level that will leave them not feeling successful. A wide variety of texts, of literacy materials as well, so that the classroom is going to prompt lots of different behaviours. If you think about the 4 resource model, you want texts that are going to allow the students to be analytical in their thinking. You'll need plenty of opportunities for the students to code break and think about the use of text, a variety of the types of text that you use as well, the importance of non-fiction. And in some of the coming tutorials, you'll find out a little bit more about how the type of text, from narratives to expositions and to content area literacy, how those can impact the reading behaviours of students. And also recognising cultural differences, and make sure you're including text from the different cultures in your classroom or from the local area. So there you have just a few elements that can help towards building a reading classroom. But this isn't always the case. It isn't always the case that these things are going to be enough for some students. Early intervention is well documented in the literature as being how the answer to students who are having reading difficulties and offering them the best opportunity to catch up, if they do, with the other students at their developmental levels. So what does intervention look like, and what is the best kind of intervention? If we think about what's been documented, we know that intervention is different from a core reading program, and it's different in the following ways. It is basically more. It's more explicit, it's more systematic, it's more intensive, and it's more supportive. Let's have a look at those. All right, for something to be explicit, it means that nothing's left to chance, that you teach all the skills that are required directly. It always involves direct explanations from you as the teacher and the modelling of what is the correct response. You need opportunities for students to respond and provide corrective feedback and then respond again. It's a great deal more pressure on you as a teacher. You need more knowledge and more skills to teach explicitly, which I'm assuming is one of the reasons that you've selected this unit. To be more systematic, instruction is purposeful and sequential. So this is where something like the reading map from First Steps comes in handy. So you can see what are the skills that are thought to be sequential in learning to read. You also have your curriculum, and it has to be purposeful, particularly for thinking about what task you're asking the students to do and what kind of instruction is required for them in order to do what you're wanting them to do. So it always involves a scope and sequence, which is well organized and hierarchical. So that's your curriculum as a guide. And interestingly, there are some scope and sequence charts that have been developed for the curriculum, which are quite handy. Being prepared for each new task that you're asked to do, which is the purposeful element. We have to think about scaffolding, and this is something that you should be very comfortable with from the prior English units that you've done. The gradual release of responsibility model is the accepted thought in how we get students scaffolded through learning something brand new. Now this should be quite familiar to you. If you look at the left hand triangle, you see that the modelled instruction comes first. This is where the teacher is doing the reading. Then shared, where it's done together. Guided, where the student reads, and independent practice on their own. I thought this was an interesting model because it also gives you the student thought on the other side, where they can consider what the teacher does and what they do along with that. For any new skill or strategy that you want students to learn, this is the way that it should be taught. The most direct way to increase that student skills is for them to have many opportunities to do that in a school day. These things need to be positive and successful in order to increase the likelihood that the learning is going to happen. So you can increase intensity by decreasing the group size, so making sure you've got a small group size when you're teaching. That means you're going to be able to share yourself across a smaller number of students. You can also increase the amount of time that is spent in instruction. So to increase the intensity, decrease the group size, and increase the amount of time that is spent in instruction. Small groups can be just as effective as one-to-one. In the literature, it tells us that a small group of 3 to 5, there's very little difference between the success that you will get compared to just being one-on-one, which is a good thing to think about for us in our guided reading groups. That's often the size that we have there, and they can be quite effective. Supportive, this is where you need to think about the other elements of your students. So you've thought about them cognitively, of course, you're supporting them through their learning, you're thinking about the scaffolding, you're thinking about what they need to learn, but there's also an emotional element to this, which is again linked to the Matthew effect, and a supportive environment. What things can you provide for the student that are going to support them in an academic way, but also an emotional way? So you could think about some tools. Maybe there are some assistive tools that are needed. This is where lots of elements of the Universal Design for Learning would come in. So thinking about providing different opportunities, thinking about allowing students to respond to a task in different ways, and always thinking about how the difficulties they're having and the challenges they're facing may affect them emotionally. We need to encourage them to give feedback and, of course, positive reinforcement. Responsive scaffolding is important too, so that if you know your student well, you can respond to particular needs based on what you're observing. So it's not just a plan that you have that you continue, day 1, day 2, day 3. You're responsive. You watch the student, you're taking note of what's happening, and you're responding in turn.